grade 12s, and welcome to this session on business cycles. Now let's look at those words, business cycle. Now a business cycle is going to be where there are successive periods of increasing as well as decreasing economic activity. Remember, your economic activity involves production, income, as well as expenditure. So within those, there's going to be fluctuations in economic activities that are going to create a cycle trend that is repeated over time. Now, these cycles do not follow a regular pattern. Each cycle is different from the previous one because the events that initiate expansion or contraction in each cycle are not exactly the same. Now, another thing that you need to know about business cycles is the duration, also known as the length, as well as the intensity of the upswing and downswing in every business cycle is going to be different. Now, you will recognize your business cycles with the following. Number one, your business cycle is going to comprise of the contraction as well as the expansion phase. Number two, your business cycle is going to have two turning points, namely the trough as well as the peak. And number three, there's going to be four phases, which is your recovery, prosperity, recession, and your depression phase. Let's have a look at the composition as well as the features of a business cycle. Now, if you have a look on the screen there, we have the business cycle or a diagram of the business cycle. Let's first start with the recovery phase. Now, during your recovery phase, this is where we're going to have an increased level of economic activities. Now, this means that more goods and services are going to be produced. This is going to result in an increased real GDP, which means that our exports are going to increase, and this means that more factors of production are going to be used by businesses, which will decrease the level of unemployment. Another thing in the recovery phase is that household income is going to increase, and they will increase their spending on goods and services. Now, the level of business confidence is going to rise because of the real GDP that is constantly increasing. And this means that investment by businesses will also increase. The level of imports also increases. And because of this, inflation is going to start to decrease. The next phase on the graph will be the prosperity phase. Usually your prosperity phase is going to start just above the trend line. Now, what happens in the prosperity phase? This simply means that in an economy, there's going to be further expansion, right? This expansion means that there's an increased activity that leads to increase in economic activities such as production, income, and expenditure. Now, there's a high utilization of the factors of production. Now, because of increased business confidence, there's going to be a higher demand for the capital goods. Now, this means that firms are going to make very high profits and other businesses will enter the market. There's going to be a high degree of optimism, especially from investors, and there's going to be excessive imports that are going to cause a deficit on the balance of payments. Why is there excessive imports? It means that the country has a lot of money in the circular flow, which causes them to demand more imports. Higher demand for credit is going to exist by businesses because they want to buy capital goods. Now, as the expansion phase continues, the price of goods and services are also going to rise, and this is definitely going to lead to inflation. Also, property prices are going to rise and the interest rates are going to be increased. The next composition is going to be your peak. Now, as you have a look on the graph there, the peak is going to be the highest turning point of the business cycle. And this is usually where your expansion phase is going to come to an end. Now, at the peak of the business cycle, it means that the economy is using most, if not all, of its resources. Remember, there's a high demand now for goods and services in the economy. Now, this is going to lead to factory capacity reaching its highest level, and it is therefore difficult for the economy to produce more goods and services and to meet the high demand. Now, this leads to upward pressure on prices, and the balance on the current account of the balance of payments is going to worsen as a result of higher demand on imports. Now, from the peak all the way downwards towards the trend line, that is known as your recession phase. Now, a recession is going to refer to a decline in the level of economic activities, right? So the period of recession begins after the economy has reached its peak, and it is the first part of the contraction phase. This means that there's a decrease in the level of economic activity. Remember, there's going to be a decrease in production, income, as well as expenditure. Now, this means that business confidence is going to decrease because businesses produce and they are going to invest less. Manufacturing production falls rapidly, and this is going to be where fewer goods and services are produced. This results in a decrease in the real GDP, and this is going to cause a depreciation in the value of the rand because of such a high demand in our imports. Now, inflation is going to increase, and interest rates are also going to increase. Businesses are going to start cutting back on the employment of the factors of production, and this is going to cause high levels of unemployment. Demand for credit is also going to start to decrease. Now, if people are unemployed, this means that the income of households is going to decrease, which is going to lead to a decrease in consumer spending. The next phase we're going to look at is your depression phase. This is usually below your trend line. Now, the depression refers to a sustained or a long economic downturn in the business cycle, and that is usually more severe than your recession phase. The period of depression is a further contraction of economic activities. This means that business confidence is going to be very low. Investment by businesses is going to decrease, and there's going to be a low demand for credit. Interest rates are going to be lowered, and businesses may close down. There's going to be a high rate of unemployment. So this is what is currently happening in South Africa because of the COVID virus. So the last point at your depression phase is going to be the trough. The trough is the bottom turning point of the cycle, and this is going to show the end of the contraction phase. Now, during the trough, there's going to be a high level of unemployment, and factors of production are underutilized. Income levels are very low during the trough period, which is going to cause aggregate demand to decrease. This usually leads to a downward pressure on prices. So there's going to be low levels of savings as well as investments. Right, so now let's move to the causes of business cycles. There are different theoretical explanations for the economic fluctuations. Now, let's start with the first one, the exogenous cause, also known as the monetarist approach. Now, the exogenous factors are going to be factors that originate from outside the domestic economic system. The monetarists are going to believe that the growth of the economy is determined by natural growth in the supply of available resources. Now, if imbalances are going to develop, the market forces will always bring the market back to equilibrium. Now, supporters of this approach say that the government should leave the market forces to their own devices and should not intervene in the economy. They also believe that any government intervention upsets the inherently stable market system and results in fluctuations in the level of economic activity. They also maintain that the major cause of business cycles is inappropriate government policies. Other external reasons for business cycles will be the following. Adverse weather conditions and natural disasters might cause fluctuations in the business cycles. Changing in tastes and habits of consumers, especially in the fashion industry. Shocks, sudden price increase of fuel, or also war from other countries. Structural changes in the form of development of technology, as well as trade restrictions, sanctions, as well as your boycotts. Now, the other one is your endogenous factors, also known as the Keynesian theory. The endogenous factors are factors that are inherent in the economy. Now, the Keynesians are going to believe that the market is unstable and that the level of economic activity is going to change constantly. Keynesians also believe that economic fluctuations are an inevitable part of the market economy, and that's why the government has a duty to use monetary and fiscal policy to intervene in the market. They also believe that the government interventions will bring stability to the economy and help to smooth out the peaks and troughs in the business cycle. So the first internal reason could be a disequilibrium between demand and supply. This is where we either have an excess in demand and supply or a shortage in demand and supply. Your other reasons could be an increase or a decrease in consumer spending. There could be changes in exchange rates that might cause fluctuations on the business cycle. There could be changes in inflation. Savings and investments will play a major part according to the Keynesian theorists, as well as disequilibrium between imports and exports, where we are importing too much or we are exporting too less, and vice versa. Businesses as well as consumer confidence will also have a very big deal on the business cycles or the fluctuations thereof. Now let's look at the kinds of business cycle. The first kind of business cycle will be your kitchen cycle. Now, this is where the business cycle is going to result from either an investment or a disinvestment in stock, especially consumables. And this usually has a lifespan of 3 to 5 years. The other one is your juggler cycle. This is where the business cycle is going to result from the investment in machinery as well as equipment, and it usually has a lifespan of 7 to 11 years. Your next one is the Kuznets cycle. This is where the business cycle is going to result from the investment in property and construction, and it's usually going to have a lifespan of 15 to 20 years. The last one is the Kondratiev cycle, and this is where the business cycle will result from the investment in transport infrastructure, and it usually has a lifespan of 45 to 60 years. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time. Remember, guys, if you have any content-related questions, you can communicate with us on the following social media platforms.